What's up, you beautiful bastards? Razio back again, and I know this is not an MMO video, but it is for one of the most hyped, at least for me, DLCs to come out in a long time for Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. I just finished the game. I played took me about 20-25 hours to get through the entire expansion of DLC, I should say, not expansion. And this is my honest, spoil-free review about it. As spoil-free as possible. I'm not going to give away boss names or show too much of the DLC on the actual screen. But anyways, let's just do the drop, and then let's get into it.
I am Razio.
First and foremost, guys, I'm going to be upfront and say that I'm going to be completely 100%, as always, honest about my review of this game. And there's a lot of sites, a lot of YouTube channels giving this DLC a 10 out of 10, calling it a masterpiece, and it's very good, but I'm gonna be honest, it's not a masterpiece. It's not a 10 out of 10. Always be aware of the kind of sites that always give stuff a 10 out of 10, and chances are, if it's from a channel that got the DLC like a whole week or two early to play the whole thing through and got the game for free, they were likely also probably paid to give a good opinion about it. I'm not calling any particular channel out. I'm just saying be careful what you hear from where you hear it from, and just be conscious of that. And you guys know me, I don't like to waste time, so let's just get right into it. Now, how I make a comparison, what I do to decide what kind of score I give a game is I kind of, have to compare this DLC with like objects, so things that are similar. So what I compared it to is obviously Elden Ring, the original game, which I was a huge fan of. I love it. Elden Ring for me was a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, one of the greatest From Software games ever made, in my opinion. So much fun. I beat it like 6-7 times right at release. I just kept replaying a new game and kept making new builds. It was just a lot of fun, and the world was huge. It was before this, Dark Souls 3 was my favorite, and Elden Ring definitely took the crown from Dark Souls 3. Then I also compare it to other FromSoft DLCs, such as Dark Souls 3, the Ring City, and stuff like that. And then I also compare it to just other DLCs that I thought were exceptional. For example, like Blood and Wine, The Witcher 3's DLC. Anyway, that's how you kind of know where I'm coming from when I'm making these comparisons of why I do or do not like something. So right out of the gate, we're going to go with the pros, the things I really, really liked about this DLC. First and foremost, it was gorgeous as always. One of the best looking games out there right now. Just as good, if not better, than the original game's visuals. It was just a fantastic, just beautiful thing to behold everywhere you went. One thing else I did really, really like about this expansion, or this DLC, I keep saying expansion, I've been playing too many MMOs, but this DLC is a lot of the exploration was on a vertical plane as opposed to a horizontal plane. So a lot of the exploration you go up or down as opposed to exploring a wide area in different directions, which was a lot different from the OG. Now granted, in the OG there are a lot of going up and going down, but in this it was very, very prominent that if you wanted to find all the secrets and find all the secret bosses and weapons and items, you have to go up and down a lot more than you have to, look around. Think outside the box, essentially. A lot of new weapons. There were 100 new weapons put in the game, and a lot of cool new weapon arts, new Ashes of War, new spells, a lot of stuff to collect. The storyline, another pro, was very, very easy to follow. And a lot easier to follow than the OG game. A lot of interesting characters to follow around. And I found it a lot easier to just follow along with what the narrative was and where you were being driven as opposed to the original game. The music, another huge pro, always fantastic, really sets the mood. A lot of eerie, dark spots. A lot of, glorious, thunderous battle themes during boss fights. It was awesome. Another pro is a lot of interesting talismans to collect, and which contribute a lot to more build crafting, theory crafting, which I'm sure, over the next few weeks to months, we're going to see a lot of insane builds come out of it for PvP and PvE. Be interested to see how some of these talismans work out to make weapons that previously weren't very good, better, or unusable. There are some cool new units and new enemies, for example, and this is not spoiling anything because it was in the launch trailer, but the boss is kind of like one of the Chinese dragons, where there's multiple people in the suit going around, the big hippopotamuses. There's some new spider scorpion creatures, some fire giants, rock giants, just some really cool enemies that weren't in the OG game, and especially the rock giant have interesting ways to kill them. Now, the next step I'm going to go into is stuff that I was neutral on. And a lot of people, this is a point of contention for a lot of people, is the new leveling system of how to get stronger, which is, collecting fragments of the tree to make yourself stronger and fragments of the spirit ashes to make your spirit summons stronger, with the maximum for yourself being 20 and the maximum for your spirit ashes being 10, which supposedly make the game easier as you get them up. I understand why they needed a leveling system at all, because otherwise you could just go into the DLC on a high level character and just mow it all down with some overpowered build, and they didn't want that to happen. So they had to do something. I'm neutral on the choice that they went with. It's fine. My only negative thing about it would be like, there's no system in the game to find fragments which fragments you may be missing. When I beat the game, I was at 17 out of 20 for the core fragments, and I was 9 out of 10 for the spirit ashes. So, I mean, I could have been stronger, a little beefier, but there's really, outside of, even if you go online and look at one of those maps, like those, interactive maps where everything is, there's no way for you to remember or know which ones you missed and got. So that would be my one negative about the system. But other than that, it didn't really bother me, and I thought it was fine. Now, let's get into the cons for the game. Now, a lot of people are complaining this game is getting a lot of mixed reviews right now everywhere because people are saying it's too hard. Is it too hard? Now, my answer to that is no. Is it harder than the OG game? Yes. Is it, which is usually always the case. The DLCs are usually always harder than the OG. Now, here's where I have some contention with the difficulty, is that the difficulty and how hard things are is artificial. It's not real. It's not harder because you have to develop new strategies, or, find better weapons and make better builds. That's not why it's harder. It's inflated hard, as in the bosses now have much bigger health pools, have much higher poise thresholds, so they're a lot harder to get crits on. But the biggest, and I'd be okay with that too, but the biggest problem, even when you get the fragments so you're not dying in one hit, you're still, every boss in the game now, as opposed to the OG, every legendary boss at least, is insanely, the aggro on them is insane. Like right out of the gate, there's no breathing room ever. They just rush you with all their abilities right at the start, and it's just, it comes out non-stop. In the OG game, there's quite a few fights, where you go in, you can throw some buffs on yourself, you can summon your spirit ash, whatever that may be, and then you can, start the fight. That's not the case with any of the bosses in this. They just charge you. They just non-stop, never let up. So it's really hard to get heals in. It's really hard to learn the fights, because still, even if you have high fragments, you're getting killed in 2, 3, sometimes 4 hits if you're lucky and you die. So why that's a problem too is almost all the bosses have these like 10 to 20 hit chain attack combos, and a lot of them have AoE after effects and cover most of the room when they do it. So it's hard to learn the fight because you're just trying to dodge so much, dodge so much, that it's actually made a bunch of people, and some even popular content creators such as Asmongold, to just make a cheesy, broken build using the finger shield and countering, not dodging anything, just blocking everything in the game. And I don't blame him for doing that. I didn't do that personally. I used the Blasphemous Blade at the beginning, and then for the vast majority of the bosses, I switched to the new Colossal Meteorite Greatsword that I found in the DLC. And then for the very last boss, I had to switch back to Blasphemous Blade because it just was impossible otherwise, for me anyway, with how much dodging and shit had to happen. But that's essentially how I eventually got through it. But a lot of people are resorting to this shield cheese because it's the difficulty is artificial and it's over the top. And luckily, this part can be patched to be better. Like, make bosses a little less aggro right out of the gate. Give the players some breathing room, and so you actually get a chance to learn the mechanics that you need to dodge, as opposed to just having to just spam dodge the whole time and dying in 2 to 3 hits. I think they need to buff how much damage you do and nerf how much damage you take as you get more fragments. Right now, the balance just seems off. That's my thoughts on how the bosses work. It's just a lot of the bosses and how they function now seem artificially unfair. The other thing I'm going to say is the camera somehow got worse. I don't know how, but the camera works against you, especially in the new boss fights, because a lot of the enemies are massive, they're huge, and the camera just gets you fucking killed so much in this game. I'm just going to say that FromSoft, fix the damn camera. It's pathetic. Okay. Now, some other stuff that are cons, but they're not as bad as the stuff I just mentioned, is outside of a few outlier weapons that you find in the game, in the DLC, most of them are forgettable. Most of the weapons seem pretty forgettable and are still outclassed by a lot of the main builds and weapons that were found in the OG games, you know, such as Blasphemous Blade, and there's a bunch of others, Rivers of Blood, stuff like that. But like, there's ultimately, if you have to nerf the old stuff to make the new stuff appealing, that's bad. I just think they need to buff a lot of the newer weapons and a lot of the sword arts, weapon arts on them, because they're just not that good. They're not as good as what you can already get in the original game. And I know some of that is subjective, but that's just my view on it. As far as I said earlier, the game is absolutely gorgeous, but there's just too much dead space in the game. There's too many areas and too many things where there's just nothing to find. There's nothing there. And a lot of areas, not even enemies. And it was actually quite disappointing. In some of the dungeons that you do find and go in, there's no boss at the end. You just find a furnace that gives you an item and then you leave. That was very disappointing for me too. There was also more reused assets than I would have liked in terms of enemies, like such as the dragons that you find, and a lot of the enemies in the DLC are just copy pasta from the OG, which I thought felt kind of lazy. And I did know that I did say that the story was easier to follow, but a big con for me is the ending, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but the ending was lackluster to the point it might as well have not even existed, because it was so weak and watered down and pathetic. Like, as opposed to like the ending that you get at the end of, you know, the Ringed City in the DLC for Dark Souls 3, which you get a whole ass big long cutscene and actually like a button put on the end of the DLC, as opposed to this. It just felt empty and like a nothing burger. But overall, I think my score is going to land between a 6.8 and a 7. And a lot of people might be screaming and burning their crosses right now, so I'll just say a 7. I give Shadow of the Erdtree a 7 out of 10. All the reasons I just explained is why I felt it was there. Once if they patch some of the aggressiveness of the bosses, buff some of the weapons, and I could see it getting up to a 7.5 or an 8. But how I came to this ultimate conclusion was, I think one of the best DLCs for any game ever made is like The Witcher 3's DLCs. Just absolutely fantastic in storytelling. All the items they added, everything about it was great. And this DLC just doesn't measure up to that. And then a big measurement for me was comparing this DLC to, like, you know, the Ringed City for Dark Souls 3. And I thought that Dark Souls 3's DLC was just much better. I would give Dark Souls 3, the OG game, a 9 out of 10, while I give Elden Ring, the OG game, a 10 out of 10. And then I would also give the DLC for Dark Souls 3 a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10, while this DLC is just like a 7. It's a 7 out of 10. It's above average. It's definitely way above average for how most DLCs are for the gaming industry today. So still, 7, remember guys, is 2 points above average. This is still a good DLC. Yes, I still think it's worth the $40 price tag, but it's not a masterpiece, and people are telling you, are trying to sell that to you otherwise, in my opinion, are doing exactly that, trying to sell you something and get views. But anyway, guys, this has been my opinion. Yours down below. What are your thoughts? And as always, my friends, keep it real.